Elon Musk raises another $20 billion for his AI startup. Nuclear power appears to be making a comeback, and Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota is ending his political career, or at least not running for reelection. All that and more today on Filtered. Elon Musk, no longer running the United States government, is back to doing what he typically does best, running and building massively huge companies. He announced this week that he raised $20 billion for his AI startup, and that's at a valuation of $230 billion. He plans to spend the money on data centers, more compute, and to keep up in the AI arms race. Now, the deal is raising sort of flashing neon signs to people thinking, we are in a bubble here. This could be a problem. There are a handful of foundational model giants now, and their valuations are more than $1 trillion combined. Let's look at some of the facts specifically. Now, XAI, that's he loves this word X, or this letter X, I should say. It raised another $20 billion. Now, he claims he was only looking for $15 billion, but people just kept on handing him gobs of cash. What are you going to do? So he took it. It values the company at nearly $250 billion. It's raised $42 billion so far, according to PitchBook. 2/3 of 2025 United States venture capital has gone to AI. So things are really, really skewing heavily towards AI. I mean, if you want to start a lemonade stand these days, you better call it lemonade.ai. OpenAI, Anthropic, XAI valued it nearly $1 trillion, just the three of those companies. In 2024, AI funding was $111 billion, according to Crunchbase. 2025, it was nearly double at $202.3 billion. So this is getting bigger and bigger. Interestingly, with Musk, people are still willing to give him money, given the fact that he is ostensibly running Tesla and a handful of other companies, while moonlighting as the head of the United States government, at least he did this time last year. And while you have fairly credible sources like the White House chief of staff saying that Musk is a self-proclaimed ketamine addict. Meanwhile, his own AI, Grok, is getting a lot of criticism for spewing out misinformation, for making it easier to create sexy, sexual, nude images of people without their consent, and for spewing racism and other nonsense. But apparently nobody cares because the name Elon Musk is magical to many, many people. Okay, now you may think I am just about to reflexively bash Elon Musk because I don't like him. Well, that's not the case. I'm not saying it's a bubble, we're all doomed. No, I think it's very much, and this is not a controversial opinion, but I think it's very easy for something to be a great new transformative technology, as AI appears to be, and there be a bubble. Many times people think it's one or the other. Well, no. In fact, there are bubbles surrounding every great technological transformation. There are winners and losers. The difference here is the operating assumption from Sam Altman at OpenAI and most of these guys is there's only going to be one winner. Whoever creates an artificial intelligence that gets to general artificial intelligence first is going to be able to totally dominate every aspect of human society, completely dominate all business, essentially dominate the world. So the stakes are high. The stakes are extraordinarily high. But let's look at the history of investment bubbles. Railroads, look back a couple of centuries. There were a lot of people who invested in railroads. They overbuilt, and a tremendous number of people lost money. And yet the build out of railroad infrastructure throughout the United States, throughout Europe, caused massive, massive good things to happen to those economies. So railroads were real. Steam engine. Now, it took a few decades for the productivity gains to really show up from the steam engine. But again, a lot of investment and a lot of failures. But steam was a really big deal. Radio and television. A century ago, again, tremendous numbers of new companies starting, investment. Most of them flopped. Yeah, wouldn't you have loved to have been one of the founding investors in ABC or CBS or NBC? Would have been nice. So when you look at and of course the .com. I mean, I'm old enough to remember pets.com. I lived through that. I started my own business and secured a few $1 million in promises from venture capital, and then poof, it all went bust. And full disclosure, didn't lose millions, but I lost significant monies for some investors in my own .com startup. But had you picked the right one, had you picked Amazon in 1997, think how extraordinarily rich you'd be today, because there were big winners. The internet technology did genuinely transform the world. The fact that the internet stock bubble burst doesn't change the fact that the internet was a technology that radically changed the world. So these bubbles sometimes can still produce public goods, chips, tools, know-how. So you've got to be careful about, it's just all a bubble, all a bubble. You need to be careful if you're investing your entire retirement in one particular AI company. Yeah, you need to be very careful about that. But the idea that you can just dismiss it all, no, I don't think that is the case at all. So let's keep this in mind. I don't know who the winner is going to be. Personally, I use ChatGPT, and I wish I could tell you it was for a brilliant number of thoughtful reasons that I carefully analyzed Anthropic and Google's AI and all the other AI. It's really just the first one I heard about. I tried it. I liked it. Then I signed up for the $20 a month service. I also frankly like the fact that, okay, finally I'm giving some money that isn't simply more money to Google, that isn't more money to Apple, that isn't more money to Amazon. So I kind of like the fact that, especially a few years ago, these seemed like the young, scrappy underdog. I mean, these days they're acting more and more like a big, brutish incumbent that's determined to become a monopoly. And they may be. That's just my own path into essentially getting addicted to open AI. And I do use it regularly. I do use it for research for this show as well. Now, I always cross-check, I fact-check, but I do, in fact, use it. So how does this all relate to Elon Musk? He's clearly extraordinarily successful at taking companies from concepts, or in the case of Tesla, a small company, and making it huge. He clearly is seen as someone who understands technology and, to a certain extent, or artificial intelligence. Let's not forget, he was one of the founders of OpenAI and had a falling out with Sam Altman. What I do question is, can any artificial intelligence company really go the distance without someone who is a true visionary who's spending 100% of their time on this? Sam Altman, by all accounts, is living this, breathing this, and thinking about OpenAI, creating world domination 24 hours a day. The same cannot be said about Elon Musk. And when you factor in his very tainted view by many in the public who see him as an unapologetic supporter of an absolute tyrant, as someone who spews forth racist, misogynist, sexist nonsense on a near daily basis, as someone who, as the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, says, is a self-professed ketamine addict, not my words, the words of the Republican president's chief of staff. Is he going to be that guy? Now, a lot of people have lost money underestimating Elon Musk in the past, but he doesn't succeed at everything. I mean, he's had Twitter now for a number of years. It, by all accounts, has lost tremendous value. It's billions of dollars worth less than it was the day he bought it. So I personally am not going to put any money in this. And I should point out, this is not an investment show. I'm not giving you investment advice. I am trying to cover the top news stories of the day and providing some analysis so that you have a better sense of what's going on in the world, especially filtered through the lens of communication skills and personal development skills. I think Musk has a real problem communicating a single-minded focus because he is involved in so many things. But Musk is, no doubt, a powerful communicator. Musk has raised more venture capital, arguably, than any other person in the history of the world. And that's a testament to the fact that he's now, by most accounts, the wealthiest person in the world. Doesn't mean he's the smartest, but he is really good at communicating to rich people, whether they are Silicon Valley investors, whether they are potentates in the Middle East, whether they are various sovereign funds from other parts of the world. He's really good at getting people excited about pulling out a pen and writing him a big check. And this may, in fact, be a game whereby whoever raises the most money and has the ability to buy the most chips from NVIDIA and others and can simply hire the most AI scientists wins. And if that's the case, that Elon Musk may be the winner. I don't know. I continue to spread my bets by investing in index funds, not only S&P 500 index funds, but also information technology index funds. Again, I'm not advising you how to invest your money, but I do want you to be careful. If you're one of the people who gave $1 billion or more to Elon Musk, I wish you good luck.
Civil defense officials are urging you to take cover.
Please stay indoors with your windows closed.
Is nuclear energy making a comeback? Uh-oh, isn't that scary? If that's your reaction, you're not alone, but let's look deeper at the facts. According to the Times, there's now a new wave of optimism building around nuclear power companies like Kairos Power. They're pushing something known as a small modular and advanced reactor designs that promise cheaper, faster to build plants, potentially feeding booming electricity demand from AI centers. Now, I was talking about AI in the last segment. We talk about it almost every day. Whether AI gets to the point of general intelligence and making us all live in nirvana, nobody knows. But one thing we do know, it sucks up lots and lots of power. There's more demand across the world than ever for power. And many people are saying, perhaps it's time to look at nuclear power again. Now, here's the problem. Nuclear's last U.S. build-out was plagued by cost overruns, delays. It is controversial. It upsets a lot of people. The perception is it's wildly dangerous. I want to analyze some of those perceptions. But first, let's look at some of the facts on this case. Kairos, and it's a firm I'm not familiar with, has been developing its reactor tech and working on it for the last decade. They have 540 full-time employees. Their first test reactor is targeted for completion in 2028, which is really right around the corner. Kairos has a deal with Google to produce 500 megawatts. That's for 2035. The reactor height is just a bit over 32 feet, and its commercial footprint is only about 60 acres. China has built 36 reactors in the last decade. U.S. completed 2 reactors in the last decade. So let me be upfront with you and full disclosure here. I'm not an investor in any nuclear power plant. But for many, many years, I did work as the primary media trainer for the International Atomic Energy Agency, which does oversee nuclear power, nuclear bombs, everything nuclear. So that did allow me to go really in depth studying this issue. And I got to tell you, a lot of my preconceptions as someone who just thinks of themselves as an intelligent, rational, educated person who reads the news, turns out many of my perceptions were way off. Can you think of nuclear power? And in my own childhood, when I was in junior high school, we had the 3 Mile Island incident, the meltdown of the core. People were scared to death. Then there was Chernobyl and that disaster. So people think of nuclear power as wildly dangerous, incredibly deadly, and they conflate the concern of nuclear power with nuclear bombs, which obviously is very deadly. Fortunately, we haven't had any go off since, on people anyway, since 1945. But let's look at the actual numbers. Coal, because of the air pollution and coal miners dying, and transportation, kills about 24.5 people per terawatt hour of energy created. So that's generally considered the most deadly. And this is courtesy of the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency, but these are seen as widely credible facts. Oil has 18.4 deaths per terawatt hour. So you think of drilling oil, you think of people out on rigs, you think of occasional explosions, you think of guys driving oil from one refinery to another. There are deaths. It's about 18.4 deaths per terawatt hour. Gas, natural gas, much healthier than coal and oil. It causes 2.8 deaths per terawatt hour, substantially better than coal. Okay, so what does nuclear power do? I mean, if coal is 24.5 deaths, then it must be like 100 or 1,000 deaths, right? Well, get ready for the numbers. Nuclear power creates 0.052 deaths per terawatt hour. So when it comes to any sort of conventional energy source, it is absurdly safer. If you cannot claim to care about human beings' lives, especially blue-collar workers' lives, and say, oh, no nukes in my town, let's continue with the coal or the oil. It's just absolutely not a credible position. So let's look at an example according to Our World in Data. If a town used 1 tera megawatt or 1 terawatt of coal in a year, coal would be associated with 25 premature deaths per year. If it used oil, 18 people would die per year for 1 terawatt of energy. Gas, 3 people would die. If they used solely nuclear power, the death rate would be so low, it would take decades for even 1 person to die. Oh, TJ, what if there's a bomb? What if it explodes? What if it melts down? Again, we're looking at averages. We know a heck of a lot of people die every year from oil extraction, from coal extraction, from natural gas extraction. We know what happens, and there is, in fact, nuclear power all over the world. We know what the rates of death are. It is simply the safest of any of those traditional forms of energy. It's not even close. Now, most fossil fuel mortality isn't from cinematic explosions. It's not going to make for a good Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. It's from chronic air pollution, fine particulates. That's what increases heart and lung disease risk across huge populations. The World Health Organization calls air pollution the world's largest environmental health risk, where millions die annually. Well, guess what? That's not a problem with nuclear power. So what's really going on here? I'm fascinated by this, not just because I want electricity and I want power less expensively, and I want the world to be able to grow economically and people to become richer, which does require power. But I'm also fascinated by this as a communications challenge and as a lens into how human beings perceive information, because the nuclear power industry does suffer from various communications challenges, and it all relates to biases as to how human beings process information. And I say that not smugly that I'm somehow above all this. I'm a part of this too. I have biases too. But what I do try to do is understand the bias to overcome it, to get a sense of what's actually true, what's real. And if you're watching this show, I hope you feel the same way. So let's look at the biases. There's something known as the availability heuristic. Chernobyl, Fukushima are memorable because it was this big dramatic event. It generated headlines. So it's available in our memory. That's why we think of nuclear power. I forgot to mention Fukushima, but I do well remember that. And the very next day, I had to train the head of the International Atomic Energy to talk about that very issue. So I remember it well. An individual person dying from pollution doesn't get any headlines. It's not on the front page of any newspaper. It's not the lead story on CNN or the BBC or Al Jazeera tonight. So they're silent. There's something known as a dread risk. Radiation triggers existential fear, even at an extraordinarily low probability. That's why people have no problem driving 3 hours to the beach, which is very dangerous, getting in a car, because 1.2 million people a year die in cars. But they think, oh, I'm not going to swim in the ocean. A shark might get me. When there are many years when nobody gets eaten by a shark, or maybe 2 people get eaten by a shark. So it's this dread risk we have. Next, there is the conflation with nuclear weapons. One word, nuclear, and it merges these 2 categories. And yeah, obviously they have some familial resemblance. But no, the average nuclear power plant does not turn into something that resembles what happened at Nagasaki or any time a nuclear bomb is dropped. So they're different things. The next bias we as humans have, fear of the invisible. You can't see radiation the way you see smoke, the way you see flames. Therefore, it feels more dangerous. Therefore, it triggers more fear. Next, headline bias. Okay, this is related to the availability heuristic, but when you have a dramatic event like Chernobyl, it gets headlines for weeks, months, sometimes years. I remember the last time I was over in the Ukraine. I mean, they're putting on shows. You can go on tourist buses to Chernobyl to check it out. There's no tourist bus reminding people, oh, by the way, your neighbor died from pollution and died at 58 rather than living to 83. There's no tourism bus to see that sort of death, and yet it happens all the time. There's a bias of the identifiable versus statistical victims. A named victim beats a data table. When you can point to a specific name of someone who died at Chernobyl, for example, it makes an impression in the way that just knowing hundreds of thousands or millions of people die around the world from air pollution, you don't see that. There's no name attached. There is probability neglect. People overweight tiny odds with horrifying outcomes. As I mentioned, no one's afraid to hop in a car for half an hour to go to the beach, even though 1.2 million people a year die in car crashes. And yet one person sees the fin of a dolphin at the beach, and there are people who will leave, think, oh, it could be sharks. It's too horrifying to imagine being eaten by a shark. It's the same thing with nuclear power. Then we have trust and institutional memory. Past cover-ups shape today's skepticism. Certainly, the former Soviet Union did not earn a lot of credibility, given how they did, in fact, cover up things with Chernobyl. But just because a government institutions cover up something does not make something inherently more dangerous or safer. Next, we have moral contamination. Radioactive feels permanently tainted beyond cleanup. Therefore, it seems more moral to say, I oppose that. Next, we have a media incentive mismatch. Chronic harms are boring. You don't win a Pulitzer Prize for that. But a spike, a temporary spike, that's clickable. That's what gets you the Pulitzer Prize. That's what gets you the more clicks on your YouTube channels. So that is a part of the bias as well. So here's what I really want you to think about. Am I asking you to go ahead and shut down all your windmills for power? No. Am I saying let's give less emphasis or less funding or fewer tax breaks to solar energy? No. But I do think any serious person who looks at the massive energy consumption needs of the whole planet over the next 10 or 20 years has to at least recognize that there has been an unfair bias against nuclear power options for all of these essentially irrational reasons. Is nuclear power perfect? No. Are there waste issues? Yes. But there's simply no other power source that is perfect. And that's why I'm frankly happy to see this warming to the idea of more nuclear power usage around the world. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz announces he will not be running for a third term. And yes, it is because of the scandal engulfing his state's welfare programs, specifically as they relate to the Somalian community there. Let's take a look at some of the issues there and some of the facts. Now, right now, it looks like Senator Amy Klobuchar is seriously looking at running to replace him because, let's face it, being governor is a lot more fun than being a senator, especially a senator in the minority party. She and others have long lusted after this position. I'm not saying there's anything bad about that. That's what politicians should do. Tim Walz has served for 2 terms, and as you may recall, was elevated to the vice presidential nomination on the Democratic ticket just a little more than a year ago in 2024. So this is kind of a quick fall from grace. He was looking to run for a third term. He's finishing up his 2nd term. So here's what's going on here. Let's look at the facts. There's a probe, and it looks at COVID-era children's feeding programs. The prosecutors say up to $9 billion may have been stolen. 90 people have been charged in federal fraud cases. 60 people convicted so far. The fraud allegations include daycare and other safety net programs. Also, of political, Republicans have not won anything statewide since 2006. It has become a pretty reliably a Democratic blue state. Walz says he can't really campaign and govern and deal with this controversy. Department of Justice sent extra resources to Minnesota because of the White House just loving to rub it in. Anything to make Kamala Harris, any decision she may look bad. They figure, why not? Let's pour gasoline on. Now, let me be clear. I'm not blaming this scandal on the White House. Certainly, they've amplified the attention. There do appear to be some problems here. Now, no one has suggested that, unlike the current occupant of the White House, that Tim Walz has personally profited from this. He is, by all accounts, a man of humble means, doesn't even own a home. His net worth is pretty insignificant, and he was a school teacher before. So he essentially has, for all practical purposes, no net worth, and no one has really accused him of personally profiting from this. But look, he is let's talk reality. He's the Democrat. The Democrats are supposed to be the party to help people. They're supposed to be the party of government. They're supposed to be the party that makes government work. So when that doesn't happen, it really cuts against their brand. It cuts against their whole reason for being. So it does especially resonate with voters. And it does, frankly, score political points for the opposing party. Republicans have loved every second of this. I have seen numerous stories of this covered breathlessly on Fox News Channel. And I'm not saying it doesn't deserve scrutiny. It certainly does deserve scrutiny. There is the added political benefit of, we got a scalp of someone who was seen as a top leader of the Democratic Party. Because let's not forget, with Kamala Harris's own brand being tarnished after losing to the least popular presidential candidate in the history of the country, Donald Trump, some looked at Tim Walz as perhaps a potential Democratic nominee for president in 2028. I don't think anyone's talking about that now. He's not going to be credible as a presidential candidate. He's not running for reelection. What are the political implications to this? There are a few. I don't want to over-dramatize this. Certainly, it hurts the Democratic brand slightly nationwide because it's yet again another reminder to many Americans, especially those who are already predisposed to this mindset of, the Democrats can't really be trusted. They can't really run programs to help people. Therefore, the Republican message of let's just make government lean, efficient, get rid of social programs, that makes it resonate a little better for those on the political right and centrist or so-called independents who like conservative messaging from time. So it does help. It certainly helps the Republican Party to see a national star, which Tim Walz was until very recently. It helps the Republican Party to diminish and tarnish a national Democratic star. He presumably can't help people raise money. He's not even able to raise money for himself. So it helps with that. It does help, frankly, stirring up racial tensions in America, which, if you're offended by me pointing out the obvious, then maybe this isn't the show for you. It does help one political party because the whole focus here has been specifically on not just welfare in general, not just a COVID-era program in general, but specifically to a group of people who are from a Somalian community, refugees from the African country Somalia, who tend to have a skin color that's a little different from mine. It's also different from the orange skin color in the White House. But let's face it, that does stir up racial hatreds, foments certain anxiety, and that does benefit one particular party. Now, I'm going to say something that is a bit controversial and may offend some of you, but I don't hold back, folks. I'm here as a sane, sensible centrist, and I call it like I see it. I call the balls and strikes, and I do try to analyze things objectively through the lens of communication skills, personal development skills, and ultimately truth. I will say this about immigrants to the United States. I mean, personally, I wish we had more immigrants to the United States. It's what makes America vibrant, interesting, and wealthier. However, now here's the part where there's going to be some controversy. It has been my observation, and this is not specific to the color of anyone's skin or the racial makeup of the group. It has been my observation that certain people who flee certain government regimes that are seen as tyrannical, if they grew up there, if they lived there, their hatred of their governments is so intense that they develop a mindset of all government is so evil and corrupt that it's impossible to ever steal from the government or do anything bad from the government. Government by itself is so awful. So anything you can take Any fib, fabrication, you say, to help you get more stuff from the government is justified because from their backgrounds, the government is always taking from you and destroying your life. Again, this is not specific to Somalia. This is not specific to African nations. It's not specific to Asian nations. It's not specific to European nations. In my own experience, it does tend to come from people who grew up in regimes that were either far right, far left, or just pure corrupt, military leaders, autocrats looting a country, communist authorities that are tyrannical in their oppression of people. And when they do come to the United States, sometimes that mindset doesn't shift to the more United States policy or more United States mindset, which is, hey, the government is here to help us, and we have to be honest in our dealings from the government and only take what we're really qualified for. So forgive me if that offends you, but that is, I do base a lot of my analysis on my own life experiences over the last 40 years working in 45 nations around the world and working with people from every possible industry and sector. Let's delve a little more deeply into the particular issues of this case. So again, Walz wasn't accused of personally stealing. It is the crime of oversight. Ultimately, these programs were under his administration, and they were fraudsters exploiting the situation at scale. That's a fancy way of saying they were stealing a lot. And the government wasn't catching it often enough. Now, I think a fair-minded person who looks at the thievery there could say, well, that's a problem, that's bad, that should be fixed over, right away. But I also think any fair-minded person who's worried about fraud, abuse, and corruption has to look at what's going on with this White House every day, whether it's the crypto scams or shaking down countries like Vietnam to let us have a hotel, or taking $100 million planes from countries that have a vital interest. To me, that is infinitely more corrupt, infinitely more fraudulent. And yet the people who seem to be most exercised by this, how dare those Somalians, let's kick all Somalians out of the country, somehow want to give a free pass to the tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of corruption going on right under our nose, right in front of us, perpetuated by the White House every day. Now, the difference, of course, is the White House has no shame. They're not embarrassed by any of it. Of course, we're stealing of course, we're putting whatever we can in our pockets. There's no shame. Whereas someone like a Tim Walz is acting like he's ashamed. The various Democrats in the administration, the Walz administration, are acting like, yes, we are embarrassed. Yes, this is a problem. Yes, we did, in fact, mismanage things. So there is kind of a flaw in our public mechanism of holding politicians accountable, where it does seem in this modern times of, if you simply act like any horrible thing you do, any corrupt thing you do is perfectly fine, and you gaslight people, what are you talking about? Of course I'm doing this. You can get away with it. If you actually act the way a normal human being with a normal conscience does, and you act embarrassed or shamed, you have to be punished accordingly and slink off the public stage. Now, from all that I haven't followed him that closely, let's be honest, how many people really follow the careers of any one governor in a not particularly huge, significant state? Tim Walz is, by all accounts, someone who's an honorable man with an honorable career, who was widely respected in his state and around the country, served as a school teacher, gym teacher, worked as what got elected to Congress as in sort of an everyman. And until this incident was perceived by the voters of his state as being admirable, where they not only voted for him governor, they voted to reelect him. So what's going to happen to him? Look, he's 61, which is not an old man, but he's not a young man. And he doesn't even own a home. So I suspect he's going to say, what do I need this for? Let me go out and make some real money. Because certainly from his position, he can get book deals, he can get speaking gigs, he can get a podcast, he can do lobbying if he wants to, he can do consulting. So he could become a very rich man if he wants to. Who knows, he may run for office one day again. It may be people see this kind of the way they see what happened to the occasional other politicians, Al Franken, the former senator, in a different light. Like, why do we run that guy out of office? That guy was pretty good. Maybe we give him another chance. So Tim Walz is still relatively young. I mean, he's almost 2 decades younger than the current president. So I'm not writing him off completely, but I also had to think, okay, you served in public life as a teacher for relatively low pay. He served as a member of Congress for quite a while, and he served as a 2-term governor of a significant state, and he was the vice presidential nominee for his party. I think he could sort of step away from politics now and say, wow, I was wildly successful in politics. Now let's try something else. Is the future of America the 19th century? That's what many people are asking with the rise in prominence of White House aide Stephen Miller. This guy's all over the place. He's on the front page of the New York Times today. He's dominating all media, in part because he is seen as the architect of the Trump administration's expansionist views and actions around the world. Here's what he said recently in regard to what happened in Venezuela. He said, we live in a world in which you can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else. But we live in a world, in the real world, Jake, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. Essentially implying that since the United States does have more military power than any other country in the world, that we can just take whatever we want. The entire world is here for the taking. Now, this used to be, frankly, the real world mentality of most people in the world, most leaders in the world throughout history. Hey, I've got more horses and bows and arrows than the country next to me. Let's take it over. So he's absolutely right that that was the real world view for perhaps most of history, but it hasn't been the real world for not only America, but the rest of the world for the last 80 years. That is what's different here. And a lot of people are getting upset. Now the talk is about annexing, taking over Greenland. Denmark's prime minister has warned that a U.S. military move against Greenland would effectively end NATO, shattering the post-World War II security framework built to prevent great power war. The moment underscores a sharp clash between 20th century lessons about mass violence and a revived belief that raw power keeps the peace. So I mentioned this guy's all over the place. He was on television 200 times last year. He has a staff of 40 people. And apparently this is a guy that Trump really, really trusts. He talks to this guy a lot more than his own sons. The entire time when Trump was out of power, that 4-year period, which was supposedly so awful when we had peace and prosperity with Biden, those bad years, this guy, Stephen Miller, was talking to President Trump daily. So he has a lot of confidence. I don't think anyone seriously suggests that this guy's going anywhere or being fired anytime soon. And he really has the ear of Trump and speaks for him. But it is time for a lot of Americans to really sit up and take this guy seriously and analyze it. Let's sift through the messages here. So we've been told, certainly by people on social media like this, on YouTube and Twitter and X and LinkedIn and all of these places, podcasters, oh my God, the elite are so awful in the world. The elite have made things so horrible for the average person living on planet Earth. The Davos, man, they're the worst. The Trilateral Commission. How often have we heard about that? Plus, the mother of all evils in the eyes of many populists, the United Nations, aren't they awful? They just waste money, take advantage of poor taxpayers in their own countries and in New York. Let's look at some actual facts, okay? 80 years before World War ended, 1865 to 1945. This is before the United Nations. This is before that evil Trilateral Commission and the Davos folks, before they ruled the world. What did the world look like back then? There was between 1.5 and 2 million people per year dying in wars. That's what the average year looked like. That's what the world looked like. War was pretty constant. Now, in World War I, there were 20 million deaths. World War II, 70 to 85 million deaths, according to various estimates. Colonial wars, imperial conflicts happened all the time. They were routine. Now, let's look at what happened once that bad old evil United Nations started to deal with niceties like international law. Now, since we're taught by so many populists and conservatives and libertarians that the United Nations can only screw up, only make things worse, only waste. If in the past there were 2 million deaths per year because of armed conflict, after the United Nations came to power, there must be, 20 million, 30 million a year dying? Let's look at the facts. There have been approximately 200 to 300,000 deaths per year in the last 80 years. So again, if you're keeping track, that's a pretty big drop from 2 million people a year dying in wars to 200,000 a year per year. So maybe the United Nations is not the single most incompetent organization in the history of the world. Maybe international law isn't just a nicety. I'll tell you who thinks it's pretty nice. The 1.8 million people a year who end up living the last 80 years because they didn't get slaughtered in a war from a major power. So has everything been perfect since World War II? No, we didn't go from 2 million deaths a year to zero. Okay, if that's going to be your criteria, that's pretty sad and pathetic. Yeah, there were problems in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine. But, and this is a pretty big but, there were no direct wars between NATO great powers. Were there some close calls? The Bay of Pigs? Yeah. But we didn't literally see Japan nuking the U.S. or the U.S. nuking Russia. We didn't go back anywhere close to the 2 million people dying a year that happened on average before the niceties of international law, the United Nations, and this modern world was created. So again, bottom line, if you care about human beings, if you care about life, maybe your own life, coming up with a system that reduces deaths in war by 85 to 90% a year should be seen as a pretty good thing. It's kind of a no-brainer if you value the life for yourself, your family, your friends, your fellow citizens in your city, your state, your country. Now, why did this happen? It's because the United States, with the United States leadership and other countries, said, hey, we got an idea. Maybe the country that has the most strength, the most weapons, the strongest military, can't just go take over other countries because they can't. That's essentially the big idea of the United Nations, of the entire world order, the so-called New World Order that's supposed to be so awful and evil. That was its big idea. One country can't just gobble up another country because it can. That was the big idea. Now, NATO prevented, along with the United Nations, prevented the great powers really duking it out for about 75 years. I mean, Russia's kind of been messing that up, certainly with our encouragement. And when you have rules around the world where countries know, hey, we're going to be a country for a while. We don't have to worry about another country just taking us over. So we're going to write rules and laws for commerce and business. And guess what happened? The world has seen greater economic growth in the last 80 years than any other time period in the history of humanity. You are no doubt richer than you would be if you got in a time machine and had the similar opportunities in your life, but it's 1945 or 1935 or 1925. But there's a good chance you or I might be dead if we had to get back in a time machine. So having a rules-based world, what Stephen Miller calls niceties, is what makes international commerce work. It's which makes you richer. You may say, well, TJ, I'm a school teacher, or I just make tires for the local John Deere plant, and I'm an American. I don't care about these other countries. Guess what? Your John Deere tires are sold to farmers in South America and in Asia. That's part of what your paycheck comes from. And if you have any kind of 401k, you invest in companies that get revenues from all over the world. There's a good chance in your own portfolio you have investments in the Teslas, the Googles, or the Amazons of the world. Guess what? They get most of their money from other countries. How do they collect that money? They don't have to say, okay, there's a new regime here with a new currency. Let's wait 5 years and create a new treaty with them. No, they're able to deal with real countries that have been in existence for quite some time, where there are rules and laws that are stable. We might not always like them. Certainly a lot of tech gurus in Silicon Valley don't like all the rules the European Union imposes on them, but it's a process they can count on. It's consistent. It doesn't change from day to day because one country simply takes over another country. So this idea that America can just take over Greenland because we can, it's a very 19th century mentality. If you think the 19th century was so great, I dare you, go live like someone in the 19th, go live like a king. See how much you enjoy not having toilets and hot water. See how much you enjoy the dysentery. See how much you enjoy living where there's an average life expectancy of about 32. Because that's what it was in the 19th century. You know, we've had peace. Yeah, I know there's been a Vietnam War and a Korean War, but we've had peace between the biggest, most powerful countries in the world since 1945. And this current administration and this architect, Stephen Miller, is trying to end all that. And if it doesn't concern you, it should. I don't care if you're a liberal, a Democrat, a progressive, a conservative, a libertarian, regardless of your positioning on the ideological spectrum. These actions by the administration this week have been so wildly inoffensive, so unconstitutional, so contemptuous of Congress, so contemptuous of the Republicans in Congress and their role in our democracy, that it is clearly impeachment-worthy behavior. And in fact, some level, Trump knows this. He mentioned just this past week that that's why it's so important for him to win the midterms, because he knows he will, in fact, be impeached if Democrats, or for that matter, Republicans who actually care about the Constitution and separation of powers, win in the 2026 elections. The coronation was supposed to be tidy. J.D. Vance falls in line, proves his loyalty, and the 2028 succession looks automatic. But the Independent says the math is suddenly getting, because the polls that once showed Vance cruising are now showing Donald Trump Jr. Yeah, Donald Trump Jr. cutting into that lead, turning heir apparent into, shall we say, front runner for now. At the same time, you can see the administration's bigger message discipline snapping into place, especially around war, power, and loyalty. In the worldview Stephen Miller has been selling on TV, diplomacy is essentially for suckers. And the world is, quote, governed by strength, by force, by power. Wow, he sounds like a manly man. That's how he framed it in a recent appearance on CNN. That force-first posture doesn't just point out towards places like Venezuela or Greenland. It also shapes how dissidents are handled at home, right here in the United States. Enter the Pentagon story. ABC News reports that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth issued a formal censure against Senator Mark Kelly, calling his conduct seditious in nature and saying Kelly improperly encouraged troops to refuse lawful orders. Not what happened. He simply told people they have the right and obligation to not follow illegal orders, which is something everyone's told in basic training. The administration says this is about military good order and discipline. Kelly says it's a political warning shot aimed at anyone, especially veterans, who publicly question the legality of certain operations. And that's the connective tissue between these two stories. Succession politics thrives on loyalty signals, and the fastest way to prove loyalty is to pick a fight that forces everyone to choose a side. In one lane, the fight is over who gets to inherit the movement. Vance, the once skeptic, remember, he said Trump was like the American Hitler. Or is it going to be someone like Trump Jr. as the bloodline option? In another lane, it's over who gets to define patriotism inside the armed forces. The oversight-minded senator saying refuse illegal orders, or the defense secretary treating that reminder as punishable defiance. So let's dive in here a little more deeply. I have never thought that J.D. Vance was the most likely Republican nominee in 2028, in part because I have my questions whether there will actually be an election. One of the things we've noticed about Donald Trump is he really, really seems to admire and respect strongmen, authoritarians around the world, and they simply don't have elections, or they don't have meaningful elections. So I'm not sure there is going to be an election. But let's, for the moment, I'll play along. There is an election. I can't see Trump willingly handing over the keys to someone that once called him America's Hitler. I just don't see it. I also see in Trump someone extraordinarily petty and jealous, as more and more people talk about J.D. Vance is the new thing and Trump is the lame duck. I think Trump starts lashing out against J.D. Vance. He does everything he can to put him down. The taunts of little little Marco, as he used to taunt Marco Rubio, and low energy Jeb. I think Lion Ted, Crooked Hillary. I think we're going to start seeing more nasty names by Trump against his own vice president. And if you think Trump won't turn on a dime, you have not been paying attention. So what happens? Perhaps, and I say only perhaps, Trump has given up the view of running again. But I think sort of the cutest thing to do in Trump's mind, the thing to do that other dictators in South America and other places do, is they run a family member. And what better family member than Don Trump Jr.? Not because he's ever shown the slightest capacity of thoughtful leadership or ability to govern, but because he's got a name that's the same as Donald Trump's. You can make the Jr. really, really small. And it would be constitutional because Donald Trump Jr. is an American citizen, as far as I know. He is over the age of 35. He hasn't served president 2 terms before, so he's eligible. I foresee Trump saying, hey, if I can install my son, I'll still get to run things. I'll never have to pack my bags. My son will do whatever I say. It will pass the constitutional test. And my son is certainly not going to allow anyone to put me in prison. What's the catch? If you're Donald Trump, I think that's the mentality. Now, you may say, well, yeah, but TJ, nobody likes Donald Trump Jr. Nobody thinks he's qualified. Well, if you are in charge of the people who count the votes, or you have enough intimidation to count the votes or to get the people to count, might not matter. Plus, as we've seen Trump already demonstrate, if you simply send in troops to the precincts of Democratic states, or of, I should say, of swing states in the parts of the cities that tend to vote most Democratic, and you just have people walking around with machine guns saying, let me see your ID, you could suppress the vote to the point where every swing state could be nudged into the Republican column. I could easily see that happening. Now, folks, again, I'm not saying this will happen. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am someone who has worked in politics, hundreds of political campaigns for the last 40 plus years. And I am someone who's been a keen observer of Donald Trump and what he does, his thought process. So to me, this is the most logical thing he does to not only hold on to power, but to keep himself from ever being put into prison. And he simply says, okay, I'm endorsing Donald Trump Jr. Any Republican who doesn't endorse him, I'm going to vilify you, attack you on Truth Social, and you're going to be inundated with death threats. Now, he won't have to say that last part out loud, but that's what will happen. And you're going to quickly see Republican after Republican sort of said, I do hereby endorse Donald Trump Jr., whether they mean it or not. And I could easily see him getting the nomination. Now, I've trotted this theory out with other experts I respect, and they've said, well, TJ, yeah, he could probably do that, but how would he ever win the general election? Well, Donald Trump is clever, he is crafty, and he does learn. He has learned from the various authoritarian dictators, whether it's Orban, whether it's Xi, whether it's whoever, and he's learned from them. And that's why you see him periodically where he says things, there's a war, I could cancel the elections, or, there's civil unrest, I could cancel things. He's always looking for ways of shutting down elections or controlling election outcomes. He certainly admires Putin's ability to win re-election easily every so often when they have sham elections. So if you're willing to have, your vice president ignore electoral college votes and vote the way you want, if you're willing to discredit electors from certain states, why couldn't Trump simply have his Department of Justice allege that the state of California has so much fraud going on, we're going to have to analyze their votes and recount them for the next year. Meanwhile, we'll have to take the remaining electoral votes, and that will be what decides the election. Well, if you take out California's electoral votes, I could easily see Donald Trump Jr., or for that matter, this pen or anything nominated by the Republican Party winning in the Electoral College. So no, it is not far-fetched. So how does this relate to the story I mentioned earlier about Mark Kelly being investigated by Pete Hegseth? I think they're test marketing this concept of, hey, if somebody criticizes us, let's just use the full force of the government to attack them, terrorize them, destroy them, perhaps bankrupt them, ruin their reputation. Today, it's going after a respected former astronaut, military leader, Senator Mark Kelly, simply for stating something that is 100% factually true. If you're in the military, you have a duty and an obligation to disobey illegal orders. And I think that Pete Hegseth and Trump are probably pretty happy now. Like, hey, we're trying this. We thought our own Republicans would shoot this down. This is crazy. They're letting us get away with it. So they're trying to destroy this person. They're trying to take away his pension. I mean, before it's all over, I wouldn't be surprised to see them try to imprison him. And that leads me to the next part of this scenario, which is it might not matter if public opinion polls show that Americans want a change of leadership in 2028. Imagine the polls showing 65% of Americans want a Democrat. They don't care who it is. Well, what if every leading Democrat is suddenly indicted by the Department of Justice for committing so-called felonies, whether it's for their mortgages or their just claims they never paid their taxes? Why not just have the Department of Justice make claims that they committed a horrible, horrific, violent crime in 1997? Therefore, they're being indicted, they're being arrested, they're being put in prison. Well, it's pretty hard to run a presidential campaign if you're in prison. Yeah, I know you can run for president if you're a convicted felon. Our current occupant has proven that. But if you're in prison, it gets pretty difficult. And what we've seen with this test marketing of this idea, going after Comey, going after Letitia James, going after Senator Mark Kelly, for simply stating either criticism, or in the case of Mark Kelly, not even criticism, for simply stating facts that don't make the current administration look good. We're going to come down with you and use the full force of government. And today, it's for polite things like trying to indict you. But I also think that Trump was very, very pleased with how clean and efficient it was to just go snatch Maduro. Hey, if we can do it here, why not right here at home? I think is the real lesson learned from this Maduro kidnapping. You could say, TJ, you're being alarmist. I hope I am. I hope we have normal, free, fair elections for primaries and general elections in 2028. But I'm very troubled by what I see, and I'm trying to connect the dots. If you think this current administration is simply all of a sudden going to say, well, we violated every other international law. We violated every other aspect of the Constitution. We violated every aspect of separation of powers. We violated every other norm about corruption and self-dealing. But, it's 2028. We're now going to play it fair and square and do a normal transition the normal way. If that's what you think, you haven't been paying attention. Question of the day comes from Diana. She is a student in my course, the 11 Essential Career Soft Skills. The question is, I would like to speak cohesively and in long sentences, which are impactful and add a great impression. Where should I start? Diana, thanks for asking the question, and I appreciate you being a student. I hope my answer doesn't sound harsh, but here's my answer. Don't do it. That is not what you want to do. You don't want long sentences when you're speaking. Great communicators often have the shortest sentences. It's actually difficult to say a long sentence without running out of breath and having to breathe. I want to reorient your thought process. Don't worry about you looking good and you having an impact and you sounding intelligent. No. I want you to focus 100% on helping someone in the audience truly understand something you've said, an idea you have. Understanding it, remembering it, so they can put it to work, so they can implement it, so they can try it, so they can do what you want them to do. That's when you'll have an impact. If you're thinking, I want to sound important and articulate, you'll have no impact. Even if the people say, wow, that person sounds really articulate. That's never your goal. Your goal is to get people to understand ideas that you already know, that are important to you, that can genuinely help them. Then use the simplest words, the shortest sentences possible to make those ideas come alive. Okay, folks, that's the show for today. Thanks so much for joining me today. This is Filtered with TJ Walker. I really appreciate you spending time with me. If you got any value out of this show today, please leave a comment, subscribe, sign up for notifications. If you're listening to this on any podcast platform, make sure you're actually subscribed or that you follow the show. Don't simply say, I'll remember it, I'll go to it. Hey, we all forget. Please go ahead and subscribe or follow the show, whether you're on Spotify, Amazon Music, any of the platforms, iHeartRadio. We love them all. Make sure you're subscribing or following, and please, please leave a review of the show. Thanks. See you tomorrow.